Do you know how to be happy? Well, tonight we'll learn some practical tactics that you can use to increase your happiness, regardless of what's happening in your life. And to do this, we'll use the story of the Happy Piranha. How you doing tonight? Excellent. Chances are you want to be happier. Happiness is like the elusive hobgoblin that we all seem to be chasing after in our lives. So what does it take to catch this mysterious creature we call happiness? Does it require more money? Do you have to have better friends and loved ones? Maybe you need a fulfilling career or to make a difference in the world. A lot of people seem to like that one. Well, yes, it turns out all of those things can actually make you happier. But what happens if you can't get any of those things right now? What if they're currently out of your reach? Does this mean that you're just doomed to be unhappy until luck finally decides to bestow those things on you? And worse yet, what happens if you need happiness, you need that momentum in order to get any of those things that you want in your life? What do you do then? As an ambitious but struggling villain, this is a question that I've had to deal with a lot. How can I find a way to be happy while stuck in this less than stellar situation? I could use my hate and desire for vengeance to fuel my passion, like some sort of Lord of the Sith. Problem is, that really wasn't working for me very well. It wasn't giving me the results I wanted, for one thing, and it wasn't even as much fun as you would think it is. So, I feel like I can do better than that and actually be happy. Although, I feel like the cape's working for me. If you feel stuck in a situation that is really making you unhappy, there is some good news. Today, psychologists agree that only about 10% of what contributes to your overall happiness comes from external factors. Most of what determines our happiness actually comes directly from our own head. And this makes a lot of sense if you think about it, because technically all happiness actually occurs in our own minds. So we can use that to our advantage. You see, the idea here, what we're really trying to do over the long term, is have happiness become our default emotion. Emotions are not permanent, static things. They fluctuate, they change, they come and go. So the idea here is that there are certain emotions that we tend to make more our default emotions. We all have a limited repertoire of emotions that we kind of go to pretty regularly when we're not feeling something else. When something else extreme isn't happening, we tend to default to certain emotions, and I think it makes a lot of sense to make happiness this default emotion or go-to emotion when we are not really feeling anything else strongly, because what other thing would you like to feel besides happiness? That seems like a really nice thing to feel most of the time. And to figure out how to do this, we're going to be using the story of the Happy Piranha. There was once a piranha who spent his days swimming around the Amazon, hanging out with his school of friends, and stripping cows to the bone in 6.2 seconds. But while he and the rest of his comrades were the terrors of the South American river system, he noticed that like all other piranha he was with, he wasn't very happy. And he started to ask himself, well, how can I be a happier piranha? So, he set about doing just that, and here's what he did. The first thing our piranha came up with was actually the simplest, and that was to try to start smiling. He noticed that a lot of the other piranha, none of them actually ever smiled. They were always grimacing because they have very pronounced underbite, as piranha often do, and he started wondering, well, what would happen if I tried smiling there? Now, he was very smart about this, because we know that physiology can impact emotion. This means that your body, the way you move, can actually bring on the emotions that are associated with that movement. So, what that basically means is that when you try to smile, you can actually become happier as a result, as opposed to the other way around. Charles Darwin was one of the first researchers to really notice this when he said that even the simulation of an emotion tends to arouse it in our minds. This particular phenomenon is what we call facial feedback. And the cool thing that researchers have noted about this is that you don't even have to do it to anyone else. You don't have to smile at someone else. You don't even have to smile in front of a mirror. Just feeling the muscles in your face contort when you smile actually can bring on the emotional states that you want there. And you can even do this just sitting alone in the dark, smiling to yourself. And you get extra points for being creepy like that, too. And you can also practice your Kubrick glare while you're doing it. Now, piranhas don't really have necks, so he wasn't able to take his advantage of this one. But you can. You can actually increase your mood and your general state of mind, your happiness, by looking up. Literally. This goes back to that idea that by changing your body posture, you can change your body's chemistry. And it relates to an idea in psychology known as embodied cognition. And in fact, this kind of makes a lot of sense if you really think about it. Because we all know what a happy, confident person looks like. The posture, the way they move, and where their head's at, physically speaking. We also know what a depressed person looks like, a sad person, and the stereotypical positioning of their bodies as well. And this translates to multiple cultures. No matter where on the planet you go, sad people who feel bad, who feel sick, who feel down, will be looking down. Will be slumped over, will be moving a certain way. And people who feel really empowered or really happy or really confident will take on those same types of postures. And in fact, even our language reflects this. We say that if someone's feeling bad, they're feeling down or low. And if someone's feeling good, things are looking up for them. So you can take advantage of this by actually mimicking the posture of a person who is happy and actually bring on those feelings in your brain's chemistry. And our piranha came to another realization, that when he swam faster, he felt better. He felt more energized, like he had greater momentum. He felt happier. And this applies to us humans as well. Exercise, yes, can make you happier in a variety of ways, actually. For one thing, we know it reduces stress. It also gives you a greater sense of control because of the discipline that it requires. And it can help you sleep better. It can help you live longer, and it's been shown to improve memory by boosting the hippocampus in the brain due to increased blood flow. It can create more energy, which can help you and make you feel better, both in the long term and short term, and of course, it releases those lovely endorphins that just make you feel really good. In fact, the only real downside to exercise is that it requires a certain amount of time and effort to do, but it has so many upsides, and that's not even including the aesthetic, better-looking aspects of it. So, yes, I would say that exercise would definitely be recommended as a good recipe for happiness. Those are some of the more simple physical ways that you can increase your happiness. Now we're going to move on to my favorite category, the purely psychological stuff, the techniques that you can use in your brain to help make you even more happy. So, affirmation/autosuggestion. Now this was one of the first tactics I ever tried when trying to reprogram my brain, And the reason I started with this many years ago was that it was actually the simplest. Although it's been argued that there are differences between autosuggestion and repeating affirmations, the truth is they're very similar, and they basically both amount to just repeating the same thing over and over to yourself until it becomes a part of your subconscious, until you believe it. And the trick here is to make this very deliberate, because we actually do this ourselves anyway. We repeat stuff to ourselves all the time. It's just usually a more haphazard, unconscious way of doing things. So what we want to do is actually repeat stuff to ourselves in a way that's helpful and very intentional to what we want. And in the case of happiness, we have to come up with happiness affirmations for ourselves. I personally decided to choose an affirmation that worked for me, that I thought kind of invoked a little bit of villainy. So the one that I started with many years ago, and I repeated to myself over and over again, was, "I am full of dark, sinister joy and diabolical bliss." And this one made me feel empowered as a agent of evil. But you can use anything you want to for this. A classic one that's been used for many years and been recommended in many books is the affirmation, "Day by day, in every way, I become happier and happier." And that one is really great. It's got a little bit of a rhyming scheme to it, which actually helps. And the idea is that you want to implant this into your mind. You want to say it over and over again and let it become habitual. A lot of people recommend starting to do it before you go to bed and right after you wake up in the morning. But what I found is if you just start implanting this into your mind to the point where you get it to like a song, like one of those songs where you just get stuck in your head, that really helps. You know, like, "Day by day, in every way, I become happier and happier." Something like that. I don't know, maybe not like that. But yes, it's great to have those pop into your head on those off moments where, and we all have them during the day, where you start to space out and you don't really think of anything in particular. If that becomes the thing you think about during those times, then that's a really great place to be, because it pops into your head like a song, and that way you know that that's being implanted, that that's becoming a habitual thought, and eventually you will begin to believe it. It will become a part of who you are, and you'll start to think it automatically. And that's the goal with this, to really get it in there. And the more you repeat it, the more you talk to yourself about it, "I become happier and happier," well, the more happier you will become. The piranha also noticed that when he took a moment to calm down from his epic feeding frenzies and just look at the sunbeams cascading through the surface of the water and relax his mind, he became happier, more at peace. And this is a tactic, of course, that we humans can use as well, meditation. Now, I admit that I really wasn't as quick to get on meditation as a lot of people are. It seemed kind of Eastern spirituality, that word, to me, and not very villainous. But what really changed my mind about this was hearing about the science of it, because not only does it help to reduce stress, but it also helps your ability to focus. This is because it increases blood flow to the prefrontal cortex there. Specifically, the type of meditation that's really good for this is the most common kind, concentration meditation. It's the type where you pay attention to your breathing and therefore, as the name implies, concentrate. And that increases your focus. So by doing that, it causes more blood flow to go to that front part of the brain that's responsible for that. In fact, there was one study where showed that people who had never meditated before, when they began a regular regimen of meditation, actually had a thickening of the cerebral cortex in their brain after a certain period of time. This kind of thing is really exciting to me because your brain is, of course, your most powerful tool, so it only makes sense to sharpen it. But in addition to helping you to think better and focus more, it does also have the additional effect of reducing stress. So basically, meditation actually helps you improve your happiness in two ways, directly and indirectly. Directly by reducing your stress levels, which is always a good thing, and indirectly by allowing you to focus more, which of course can increase your happiness in many other aspects of your life because it makes you more effective. So, as many people have noted, and it's become very popular very recently in the last few years, meditation is a really great way to improve your life and make you happier, obviously. Hypnosis is one of my favorite techniques, and it's something that I've been practicing for many years now. I really like the idea of being able to implant specific ideas directly into your subconscious like that. And that's exactly what hypnosis is designed to do. Some people have argued that it's very similar to meditation. I would say so, especially the induction process of hypnosis. The part where you get into the hypnotic state is very similar to meditation, and guided meditation can sometimes seem almost indistinguishable from hypnosis. It's not very surprising, if you really think about it, that hypnosis and meditation would have some similarities because they're both using the same tool, your brain, and sometimes they have similar aims. Discussing hypnosis in depth is a little bit out of the scope of this video, but there are plenty of other resources, including many things on YouTube, that will help you with that process, and of course lots of books on the subject, and I might talk about it later, especially if you guys would like me to. Definitely leave something in the comments there if you would like to hear more about this. But suffice it to say, it's a really powerful technique that I recommend, and it's just a wonderful way to plant some more happiness into your minds there. Now, up until this point, the piranha would often take offense to some of the other behavior that the other fish in his school would do. For instance, if another piranha came up and took a bite of the meat victim that they were going after during a feeding frenzy, that our piranha would normally have gone for, he used to take offense to this. But then he realized that he could block these unproductive thoughts. He could just tell himself a different story about that. For example, he could tell himself that that other piranha made a mistake. He simply didn't know the piranha protocol. Or that he just got carried away during the feeding frenzy and just didn't realize he was being an ill-mannered piranha. The other thing he could do is just remind himself that getting mad at this other individual isn't going to help him at all because they're all working towards a common goal, and so he had to let things slide because it's not really such a big deal in the whole scheme of things. Or he could even decide that he wouldn't get mad at this other piranha because it didn't serve his purposes to feel that way. He wanted to be a happy piranha, and so he would make the decision to help himself be happier by not dwelling on that event and moving on. He isn't going to let it ruin his day. Now, when I discovered this technique, it was kind of amazing. It was a real game changer. You can use this even with just thoughts that pop into your head, but what it really seems to shine is when it comes to external things that might really impact your day. You know, those little things that we can really dwell on, or maybe some big things too, that just come into our minds that we say, you know, hey, this is terrible, this is horrible, I should feel bad about this. Well, guess what? There is actually no assigned emotion to these events, meaning you don't have to feel bad about anything, really. I mean, there are some things that are very easy to feel bad, depressed, angry about, but you don't actually have to. And it's an amazing thing when you really think about this. So here's how this works. An event happens, a neutral event, because we live in an indifferent universe. We assign meaning to events. So a neutral event happens, and it comes into our minds. Our limbic system reacts and sends a very basic pleasure or pain signal, this is good or this is bad, and that information goes to our frontal cortex, the more complex logical part of our brain that really assigns stuff consciously or thinks about things consciously, and that assigns more meaning to it. We give a designation to it, we say, this is what happened, we process it consciously, and we decide what it means to us. So, if something really terrible happens, we can say, well, okay, this is bad, okay, this is really terrible, and it happens in a split second. But what we need to understand is that once it's in that conscious part of our brain, we also have some control over how we react to it. We can decide to cut it off right there. We can say, hey, I don't want to get upset about this for any reason we want to. And we can usually come up with multiple reasons because there's that filter there, that one moment where it's like, okay, I could react to this and then get upset about it and start rehashing it, or I could choose to give it a different meaning, tell myself a different story about it. And the goal of telling ourselves a different story than we would automatically tell ourselves otherwise is to lessen the negative impact that the perception of this event, the perception, would normally have on us and our happiness. So for example, if something is devastating, if it's the end of the world, if my life is over, that's a really much different statement than if we said, well, that's kind of annoying, I might have to deal with that. It's a completely different context there. It's a completely different way of looking at an event, which will affect your mood and your happiness. And I think we all know people who just always have a tendency to sort of blow things out of proportion, right? So, and you don't have to do that. You can choose to perceive things any way you'd like to, and it only makes sense then to try to perceive things in a way that will make you happier, to change that story. And one of the interesting parts about this is that a lot of times we can see these negative emotions coming. We can know that something's going to really tick us off, or that something's going to make us feel really sad and miserable. A lot of times we can actually feel it happening in our minds. Anytime you felt the emotion of anger welling up in you, that's actually what's happening. Your brain's processing it, it's revving itself up. When you feel like you're about to break into tears, same thing. But you can cut that off. You can just say, no, stop, brain, we're not doing this. This is not acceptable or not something that I want to feel. It's not going to help me. It's not going to make me any happier. And the interesting thing is, you've done this before. It's called growing up to a certain extent. When a kid, something happens, something little, they can really, what adults would consider, overreact to it. They can start crying or get really upset when it should be perceived as nothing, or at least we think so. So what happens there is that at a certain point when they get older, it just kind of stops. And we've all went through this, where something that would have really upset us, we just kind of let it go. It just doesn't bother us anymore. And a lot of times we sort of make a decision just not to do this, because fortunately we all have that part of our brain, or at least I hope we do, where we tell ourselves, okay, flying into a violent psychotic rage, or falling down on the ground and crying hysterically because somebody on the street looked at us funny and we didn't like it, is counterproductive. So we hopefully have a filter there that says, no, we're not going to react that way, this is not a big deal, and we tell ourselves that story, and it lessens the impact of that event for us. And I think this can technically work for even stuff that truly is terrible, and you could argue that stuff at a certain point you should feel bad about, and maybe you should, but there's a whole lot of stuff that can make your day worse that doesn't need to. Just little stupid things. And those things add up. And it can have a negative impact on our happiness, and we don't want that because we want to be like the Happy Piranha. Now, if you think that you can't control this, if you're telling yourself right now, okay, that's great, I know that those events don't mean anything until they come into my head, but this is how it is, I have to react like this. Well, you're not alone, because that's how most people assume it works. But all it really means is that you haven't practiced that enough or haven't done it consciously. And that is the one catch to this technique. The one hard part is it requires a lot of constant attention. You have to be fully aware of your feelings and what's going on when things are happening. And I'll let you know right now that you will slip up on this. You can't possibly control that all the time consciously, especially if you've never done it before. You're probably going to slip up a lot when you first try this. But over time, you build up what might be called a thick skin, for lack of a better word. When people talk about toughening up emotionally, I think this is basically what they're referring to. There are some people who just let things slip off them, bounce off them, whatever metaphor you would like, and it doesn't seem to bother them that way. And this is partly, at least, because they tell themselves a different story about what those events mean. The same thing could happen to two different people, and they could have completely different reactions to it, like losing a job, for example. One person can lose their job and think that, I'm screwed, this is the end of my life, that's it, I don't know what the heck I'm going to do now. And another person could see it as an opportunity. Okay, well now I'm going to go find a better job because now I've got an excuse to leave and this is something I want to do anyway. And the crazy part is, the exact same person could come to either one of those decisions. They could have the exact same situation in life, but choose to respond to it completely different, or in a different way. And I think that should be the goal here. We should try to do things, perceive things in a way that empower us, but it takes a little bit of effort and work, and we have to fundamentally believe that we have the ability to control how we perceive things and how we process it, because guess what? We do. It's our minds. We get to say how we feel about stuff. And I should also mention that the reason that people often have a lot of trouble with this is because our minds have a tendency to just go on autopilot. We just like to automatically assign meanings to things. This equals this is how my mind works, and it's unavoidable. I can't change that. But you can, and you will be much happier if you do. The trick is, you just have to have that level of consciousness and awareness about it, and don't be lazy. And happiness does require work, and this is definitely a really powerful technique that has the ability to make you much happier, because suddenly you become fully aware when you use this properly that, hey, I can control my own mind. This is great. I have a new superpower. That's basically what I thought when I really first started experimenting with this. The first time I successfully did this, it was really cool. And you won't get it every time. You'll slip up, but it's definitely something to ingrain in your mind, a behavior that you should definitely adopt, because it will make you much happier and just empowered. And for any of you who are also wondering, well, isn't there more of an objective way to look at this, to say, okay, this is definitely bad and it always has to be bad? Because I know a lot of people automatically think that because that's how their brains usually work. The truth is, you don't have the objective facts anyway. Your brain is not able to process everything that's going on, or even able to really comprehend or store all the information. Everything is a story. You're not being delusional by adopting this sort of tactic, because you're kind of a delusional anyway, is really what it comes down to. There is no objective perception, because it's perception. It's all filtered through your consciousness, and your brain picks out and selects what it's going to pay attention to. there isn't a real way to see everything. Our brains are not capable of taking in all the facts, all the information, all of the data of everything that's going around all the time. And even if they were, that still doesn't include other people's intentions. So it's all just a story we make up. It's like the whole glass half full, glass half empty metaphor or analogy. One of those two. But either way, the glass half full idea that says you look at the glass as either half full or half empty and focus on one of those two facts about the glass. And this is very accurate because this is a lot like how your brain actually works. It has a tendency to zero in on what it's looking for. So if you're looking for the glass to be half empty, then you're going to notice that first. And if you're looking for it to be half full, then you might notice that. And this is basically how our brains operate with everything. We actually tend to notice what we're looking for. So that's an important thing to remember when you're looking for happiness. And this is something that our piranha quickly learned. So when he's swimming in formation and another fish cuts him off, he decided he's not going to take it personally. Maybe the other fish just screwed up. Maybe the other fish had a really good reason for getting over there. Or maybe it doesn't even really matter, because the piranha now held himself to a higher standard. He wasn't going to let those things bother him anymore, because he wanted to be happy, and he knows that all those little things add up, and he won't be a very happy piranha if he lets all those little things get to him. And the same goes for you as well. You can't allow that to get to you all the time, and the less stuff gets to you, the less you are negatively impacted by various events that are going on, a lot of which you have absolutely no control over, generally the happier you'll be. So the piranha also began to realize that anytime he wanted to change his mood, one thing he could do is think about things from his past that helped him to bolster that particular kind of mood. So, for instance, anytime he needed to feel a real confidence boost, feel good about himself, he wouldn't dwell on the things in his past that hurt him or that made him feel bad where he failed. What he would think about is something cool, like that time that he ripped through a freshwater stingray like a bullet, like it was nothing. So it was kind of like, blood in the water. And then the other piranha are like, whoa man, you're crazy. That was awesome. Okay, so that was fun. So what we're going to do now is a classic NLP, neuro-linguistic programming exercise. And by the way, NLP has its roots in Eckersonian hypnosis, so once again we actually see some overlap between these mental techniques. What I'm going to ask you to do is think about something that you're concerned with happening in the future, something that you're worried about, a scenario that you see coming, you're afraid's going to come in the future that you are afraid of or bothered by or don't really want to have to deal with. And I know, none of us ever worry about what's happening in the future, right? Of course not, but let's just pretend you did for a second, okay? I want you to just really think about this. Okay, so this is audience participation time. What I'd like you to do is close your eyes for a moment. And I want you to picture that scenario, that scene that you're worried about, that concerns you, that possible future that you would rather didn't come to pass. And I would like you to imagine that image of that scene being shrunk down like on a computer screen. Let it slowly start to shrink, and as it does, distort the sound of it, so that you can't hear it as well anymore. Distort the visuals of it, no matter who's involved, no matter what you're imagining. Make it more grainy, make it less vibrant, more black and white. Maybe make it more pixelated if you'd like. But start to shrink it down and distort it, that thing that you're worried about, that thing that you're afraid of, and let it start to crack. Let that image start to crack and crumble and become more distorted. And eventually it will just break apart into dust and flow off into the ether, and replace that with an image of something you like, a new scenario, a future scenario that you want to see happen, the future that you want exactly. Envision it exactly how you want that to play out, with the people, with the events, and let that explode to replace that other image. Let it be vibrant, hear the sounds, smell the smells, give the feeling that you want, and let it just come at you. Let it just fill the entire screen as if you're standing right there. You are in that scene now. You are getting the future that you want, and you are living it, and it's right there in front of you, empowering and awesome, and that is exactly what you want. So you can open your eyes now. Feel better? Excellent. Now that's an example of a NLP, neuro-linguistic programming visualization technique, a pretty simple example, but you can use that kind of thing anytime you want to feel better about a future event that you're worried about. And of course the goal of that is to replace the idea of this thing that hasn't even happened yet that you're concerned with something that you want to happen. And that's definitely going to improve the quality of your life, and not only that, but it'll probably make you more confident about doing something or having to deal with something that would have otherwise caused you some distress. But you can also use a very similar technique for past events as well. And this one specifically I really like for memories about dealing with other people. Let's say you had a confrontation or an argument with someone. Could be boss, coworker, friends, loved one. It doesn't really matter. You have this situation that you weren't very pleased with, that really is just you're replaying over and over again in your mind. And technically this could also be used for just a time you screwed up on your own too. Any of those kinds of situations that we dwell on, that we just replay over and over again and just seem to kind of haunt us way after they're already done with. They're in the past, but they still bother us. What you can do is imagine that scenario that you're already replaying in your head way too much. But start to fast forward and rewind it. Just imagine that scenario, but then go fast forward, and then rewind it, and just do that over and over again several times. Then start to similarly distort it a little bit like we did with that last exercise. Make it black and white. Maybe alter it a little bit. If you're dealing with somebody there, do funny things to them, like maybe, put a sombrero on their head, or if they were wearing a sombrero during this confrontation, have them without a sombrero. You get the idea. Funny mustache. Make their voices distorted. Make them high-pitched. Make them make farting noises. Whatever you want to do. Anything you want to do with that. Maybe make them look like one of those crazy funhouse mirrors. Turn them into cartoon characters. The point is, what you want to do is mess with this memory a little bit. And this does a couple of interesting things. The first thing it does is cause you to take it less seriously. It's harder to really dwell on something like that when you will start looking at it like that, and it becomes kind of ridiculous. It's like, well, this was kind of stupid. You just realize, wow, I can distance myself from this. But then you also mess with the data. It's a bit like scratching a record, if you want an old school example, or distorting data, corrupting a hard drive. What you want to do is make it harder to really dwell on that, to visualize it by messing with the information in your head right there. And that makes it easier for you to move on from, to process, because it's not as significant anymore. It's becomes less tangible, and that makes it easier to just move on from, and you stop worrying about it as much. You can just go, oh yeah, that didn't really matter as much as I thought it did. And in addition to that, this has one other very interesting benefit. It proves to you the power of your own mind, how you can control these memories. Once you do this with some event that you were dwelling on too much, you begin to realize, wow, I have power over this stuff. I can control my own mind. How amazing is that? I have power over these memories. These memories do not have to control me or haunt me or define me. I can control them. I can do anything I want to with these memories. And, that's a very empowering thing once you realize that, because a lot of us go through life and we think that these memories are going to define us. We use our past to define us. But the only way you can really change, the only way you can become happier, is if you decide, no, what happened in the past is not going to happen in the future. I'm going to change that. And being able to realize you can alter your memories, alter your past, really helps. And by the way, there's actually been experiments done with hypnosis that tell us that you can actually implant new memories into people. I'm not necessarily recommending this, but we do know that memories are very unreliable. It's hard to remember what goes on. Anyone who's an investigator, police officer, detective can tell you that human memory is not very reliable, and we also know that some memories can be completely made up. Like, for example, how many times have you remember seeing a movie when you were much younger as a kid, but then you go back and see it years later, and something that you thought happened in it didn't actually happen, or a scene looked differently, or something like that? That actually happens a lot. And we realize that our memories are definitely not photographic. They change, they can be altered. And when you realize that you can do this, you realize that your memories do not need to define you. And you can just simply move on from them. And that's a really amazing, incredible thing to know. Although it didn't seem very predatory, the piranha noticed that when he focused on gratitude, the things in life that were going right for him, the things that he enjoyed, even some of the simple things, he felt happier. So, swimming along, playing among the seaweed, enjoying the warm water, gnawing someone's leg off, the simple things in life just made life better for him. And when he thought about those and reminded himself of those simple pleasures, it made him much more grateful and therefore much more happy. And the reason this works is because it's very hard to be depressed or fearful or angry when you feel genuine gratitude. It's really interesting. And once again, this goes back to the idea that you become what you focus on, or you can create habits, at least, that will allow you to become better. You will program your brain to look for those sorts of things. Remember how earlier we talked about how our brains tend to focus on certain things and not other things, the glass half full, glass half empty kind of scenario? Well, same thing applies here. By reminding yourself over and over again what you're grateful for, it's easier to program your brain to look for those things and ignore some of the things that are, suck, basically. Because we do all have things that suck in our lives, but we also have things that we could be grateful for. And if you don't believe you have something that you could be grateful for, just ask yourself, if I could be grateful for something in my life right now, what would it be? Chances are, if you are watching this video right now, if you are able, physically, economically, technologically able to watch this video right now, you have something you could be grateful for if you really wanted to. And so you just have to remind yourself of that and try to focus on that, and more importantly, train your brain to focus on those things and find those things, and by extension, it'll end up ignoring more of the negative stuff that really just blows, because guess what? All of our lives have stuff that sucks, and all of our lives have stuff that's pretty awesome. So we just have to learn to pick out the stuff that's awesome and ignore some of the stuff that sucks, because we can be happier there. And this was an idea that I remember first hearing about when it was popularized by Oprah Winfrey a few years ago, where she talked about how she used to write down 5 things she was grateful for every night before bed. But this actually goes back way before that to, I've read about it in Napoleon Hill's Think and Get Rich there, which was written in the 1930s, I believe, and probably goes back way before that as well. It's a very old idea, but it works. Just focusing on what you're grateful for, and even better, writing it down, can really help improve your life, both in the short term, because it gives you a nice little boost, and it does feel good sometimes to remember what you're grateful for, to get you into that mindset, that state. But then you do that enough times, and you can also train your brain to do it automatically, so that you don't have to try, and it just happens. You just focus on what you're grateful for, and you ignore some of the stuff that is god-awful. Yeah? That seems like a better way to live to me. Oh. Despite his progression towards happiness, the piranha also began to notice that he never was completely satisfied. He was definitely happier, but he always wanted something more. He wanted more accomplishments. He always wanted more food. He always wanted to swim faster, to take down bigger prey. He wanted to do more. And this applies to people as well. People tend to be happiest when they're working towards something. So ironically, real satisfaction comes from the actions we take, from not ever truly being satisfied. Feeling a sense of progress in your life is very important, very fundamental to happiness, because it gives you a sense that you have direction and control. It's the opposite of feeling stuck, if you really think about it. And what you'll find is that whenever you achieve a goal, especially if it's a big goal, what usually happens, and many people throughout history can attest to this, is that you'll first be on cloud 9 about it. You'll be like, oh yes, I finally achieved my goal, and that'll last for a little while. But then what happens is that you start to look around and go, well, wait a second, is this all there is? Is this all there is to that goal? And then you'll need a new goal, or you'll just get depressed and feel bad. In fact, this has probably happened to you before. You have probably achieved something in your life, but now it may seem insignificant or inconsequential because you already did it. So part of the key to happiness is actually growing and improving. The idea of happiness being about the journey and not the destination, for a long time really didn't sit well with me, because it didn't seem very villainous. I like the idea of being really goal-oriented, going after something and trying to achieve it. That just seemed more empowering to me. It made more sense intuitively. But then I remembered this quote. It's a poem by John Quincy Adams. My wants are many, and if told, would muster many a score, and if each wish a mint of gold, I still should long for more. There's something very ambitious about that poem, or especially that section of it, and arguably even a little bit greedy, but it talks, or speaks to rather, this idea that people should be ambitious. Even if you're not ambitious in the typical sense, you should still want to progress, because progression is what leads to happiness. And if you want to achieve anything, the idea isn't really to be satisfied. The idea is to just keep going, to keep moving, to keep progressing. And if you think about it, in a way, I believe stagnation is death. Death is what happens when you stop moving for too long. So I think that progress and momentum are definitely essential to happiness, and Many people, and in fact many psychological studies, can tell us the same thing. Yes, moving forward, growing, becoming better are definitely essential to happiness. And that's where a lot of the things that we've already talked about really tie in, because if you do a lot of the stuff that we've already gone over on this list, you will be happier, you will accomplish things. And some of this stuff, things like exercise, for example, or hypnosis, meditation, just to name a few things there, you can just keep progressing and leveling up indefinitely. There's a whole rabbit hole of each of those things, and that doesn't even include all other spheres of life that you can continuously grow and master. Happiness itself could be seen as a journey in a way, and so that kind of makes it exciting if you think about it, and definitely something worth going after and keeping in mind that the growth, the feeling of progress, the feeling of this journey is a big part of the actual happiness itself. In this way, happiness isn't a clear objective so much as it's a state that's continued and perpetuated through your daily actions and routines and, of course, mindset. What's the biggest reason that the Happy Piranha is so happy? Well, it's because he decided to be happy. He made happiness a part of his standards, one of his highest values, his goals. He decided that he was going to be a happy piranha. And making that kind of decision is one of the most important things that we can do for our own happiness. Making that, internalizing that as one of our values or as a part of our identity, saying, I identify as happy. I am going to be a happy person. Now you may be saying, well, okay, that's all well and good, but what do we do if we're not actually happy? Do we fake it till we make it? Well, yeah, that's part of it. But there's something else you can do too. If you don't feel like you can even say that you are genuinely a happy person and keep a straight face, then you can just say, okay, I'm going to be happy. I am going to find a way to be happy, damn it. That is now my new priority. No matter what happens, I don't care what's going on out here. I don't even care what's going on up here. I am going to find a way to be happy regardless. That is it. I can do this. This is part of who I am. And that's the amazing thing with happiness. The only person you really have to convince is yourself. If you believe you're happy, then guess what? You're happy. You know, it's really is all psychological there. And reinforcing that, identifying with that, believing that, and perpetuating that idea in your minds only helps encourage your own happiness. And I'm not saying it's easy. In fact, it requires quite a lot of effort. Happiness requires work. But it can be achieved. You can reprogram your mind to be happier. And I think that's a worthwhile thing. In fact, if there's anything worth spending your time on, any skill that you should learn, being happy would be probably pretty high up there if you really think about it. I can't think of anything else that you would probably need under literally any circumstance that comes up in your life, no matter what happens in your entire life. Being happy could be pretty helpful, I would say. Wouldn't you agree? I think so. Being happy is just nice. It's a wonderful thing. And it's not something that you can expect to happen all of the time, but it's a good default emotion. It's good to lean towards happiness if you can. And I think we all can. I think we can all improve that, become happier, more productive villains. Or just normal people, if that's what you're into, too. I don't know. But more productive achievers, because happiness actually makes you more productive. And for any of you who are worried about, well, okay, but will I get lazy being happy? Isn't it my lack of happiness what's driving me? And some people have this fear. I actually have this fear. Well, okay, if I embrace happiness, then won't that make me just complacent and lazy? But then I realized, actually feeling stuck makes you really complacent and lazy. being happy actually helps your productivity. It really does. It does not slow you down at all. It actually makes things better. So, yeah, there actually really isn't a downside to happiness, honestly. I really can't think of any downside to happiness, practically speaking. It's just a better state to be in. And so, I highly recommend, if you aren't feeling happy enough, work on it. Improve it. You deserve it. You should be happy. Happiness is wonderful. And as for our friend, our Happy Piranha, well, he is a much more productive, much happier razor-toothed killer fish now. As you're enjoying what we're doing here at Twisted Genius, remember to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any more villainous inspiration and dark fun. This is False Prophet saying, stay happy, stay evil, and good night. Good. Now let the happiness flow through you. It makes you strong. It gives you focus.